Hello. Welcome to Hauser Wirth. I'm Russell Salmon, Director of Public Programs here at the Gallery. On behalf of Hauser Wirth, MUBI, and The Office, we are thrilled to have you all here this evening to celebrate the exclusive worldwide streaming release of William Kentridge's brilliant series, Self-Portrait as a Coffee Pot. Yes. Filming for the series began in Kentridge's Johannesburg studio during the COVID-19 lockdown in 2020 and was completed in 2023. Following special previews at Toronto International Film Festival and BFI London Film Festival, and its presentation at the Arsenale Institute for the Politics of Representation, curated by Caroline Christoph Bakargiev during the Venice Biennale of Art 2024, which ends next month, the series was acquired and has been released by MUBI to stream exclusively on their platform. Tonight, we are honored to welcome artist William Kentridge, renowned for his animated drawings for projection, as well as his sculpture, theater, and opera productions, for a conversation with Joslyn Barnes from Louverture Films, one of the producers on Self-Portrait as a Coffee Pot, moderated by The Kitchen's senior curator, Robyn Farrell. After the conversation this evening, you are all welcome to join us in the Roth Bar and the bookshop for drinks and bites, along with an amazing DJ from MUBI to further celebrate. Before we get started, I have some very important and special people to thank. Thank you to our friends at the Office and MUBI for their gracious collaboration on tonight's program, Noah Bashevkin and Rachel Chanoff at the Office. Ibti Omer, Irene Musumechi, and Sanam Garagozlu, all of whom were pivotal in making this evening a reality. From the Hauser Wirth team, thank you to our presidents, Ivan and Manuela Wirth and Mark Peo, as well as Anders Bergstrom, Marigold Freeland, Fiona Romer, Ellie Hawley, Carolina Sabater, and Angelique Owens for all their support on this program. On your seats this evening is a custom William Kentridge designed MUBI tote bag, which includes a limited edition zine produced in honor of the series and also designed in collaboration with William Kentridge. Thank you all again for being here. Now, before we begin this evening's conversation, please enjoy MUBI's beautiful trailer for William Kentridge's Self-Portrait as a Coffee Pot.
When I was 3 years old, I wanted to be an elephant. I failed at that, so I was reduced to being an artist.
The studio is both a physical place and a metaphoric space. It's a place of making and of making meaning.
I prefer the solitary act of drawing. I prefer the companionship of collaborators. One of the hard things to realize is the edge of who one is, of what your imagination can produce. This is the job of the studio, to turn that which is invisible into something visible. So you start thinking you'll do a picture of the whole universe, but you end up with a coffee pot.
And now, please join me in welcoming William Kentridge, Joslyn Barnes, and Robyn Farrell.
Okay, hi. This is not up. Can you hear me? Yeah. There we are. Okay, hi. I'm Robyn Farrell. I'm senior curator at the Kitchen, and I'm thrilled to be moderating a conversation tonight to speak about this amazing launch of your new episodic series. And I know that you all just watched the trailer, and so I thought I would kick off the conversation with the ways in which William has described the studio as an engine room, a space for making a drawing, a film, but also a space for making meaning. And I think that really comes throughout each one of these episodes. And my question to begin here is, did you embark on this studio-based video series out of the circumstances of the pandemic? Or is it an idea or an experiment that had sort of been something you wanted to work out for a while?
The origin of this project was an invitation by a Broadway producer to direct a play on Broadway that would have been a complete disaster for me to have done. But I thought, while I had the attention of this producer, let me see what else could be done. So on a flight across, I invented the idea of these, sort of allowing it to flower as I wrote it down. Here are different themes, here are different topics, here are different things that could be done. And we had a breakfast where I described this to him, which he was singularly uninterested in. And maybe that was fine. About 6 months later, he kind of disappeared from public view in one of the Me Too things that hit Broadway. And I found a very different producer in Joslyn. And so it had kind of bubbled as a thought. And then I thought, okay, well, even if it's not going to happen with this producer, maybe it can still happen. So I spoke to Rachel from the office, who is the helpmeet in all strange projects. And the notes were made the first notes of topics were about a year before it began. And then when it was clear we were going to have lockdown and that travel was not going to be possible, I thought, well, now I'm going to have a moment of actual clear time in the studio to do it. And I hadn't realized it would be sort of 18 months of no travel. But it was in a strange way a blessing to have. So it started off with just one person in the studio who was staying in the cottage of the garden, so it's in our lockdown bubble. So he was both sound and camera, and then gradually as the lockdown eased, so more people came in, and the shape of the project found its form between the producers and what was possible in the studio. So it had been anticipated, but it became a real possibility. And then, of course, the pandemic shaped the nature of it. It became about being isolated. It shaped itself into always being in the one studio in the garden, that it kept a kind of diary of COVID. When it started, no one knew how big or how small COVID was going to be. Now, of course, I wish it had been more accurate and careful diary, but it's how it is.
I wonder if that uncertainty, right, of kind of not knowing how long or how many collaborators might be, involved, and the fact that it was unscripted, did you find that, a freeing or liberating aspect of the filming process?
Well, I think the animated films that I've made have always been made without a script or a storyboard. And that's partly, initially I wrote feature scripts. And I thought I would try to get those made, and then I realized I'd sent them off. They sent through friends to someone in Hollywood, and they said, "Oh, we're talking to Brad Pitt. Put the champagne in the cold box. Don't open it yet, but we're getting there." At which point I realized I would spend my life jumping through other people's hoops, trying to get other people enthusiastic about what I wanted in order to be able to practice my métier. So I then decided, let me find a way of filmmaking which I can be dependent on no one else's enthusiasm at that moment. I can, with a roll of film and a camera, I can start filming on day one. And so the same principle, I said, is it possible to work again in the same way, from an impulse outwards? And in this case, I was completely blessed by producers who didn't say, no, we need to have a clear treatment, we need to have a proper script, we need a shooting script, we need a schedule, to say we'll follow it where it goes. So in that sense, it was enormously open, and it means you shoot more than you would otherwise because you don't know what stuff's going to work. But it was a test also. Is it possible to do something that can cohere, that isn't kind of entirely pre-planned and worked out?
Right. Joslyn, I think this is your cue to introduce you and how you two were connected, the beginning of your collaboration, and specifically how Louverture Films wanted to do the project, and if you could kind of give us a shape of the format and the process and.
Sure. I mean, and just to say, to acknowledge some of the executive producers here tonight, Susan Rockefeller and Maida Lynn, and our producing colleagues, Rachel Chanoff and Noah Bashevkin from Office Arts and Film. They approached me. They approached Louverture. They came to our office. William came to our office. I remember sitting on a chair, blinking slowly that William Kentridge was in my office. And I had this little miniature rhinoceros on my table, which I don't know if you noticed, but I put it there to greet you. Yeah, I mean, my feeling was just, my initial feeling was, of course, it would be so interesting to work with William on anything that he might like to do. And I think they were just looking for a producer who had maybe a little more seasoned, and we were looking for financing and just sort of guidance, I think, in taking this forward. For me, I thought about the history of William's work, and I thought it was courageous for him to take on what is effectively a new art form for him. I knew that he had done, of course, the animations, but this is a different way of going about thinking about cinema and how cinema could work for this. And when they described what it was they wanted to do, and thinking about, an artist making work and how to create the form that would best serve that project. COVID came into play, of course, but just, initially I was thinking about the way that imagining William with the charcoal in his hand. The charcoal itself is such an unusual, it's such an ancient way of drawing, and, cave paintings onward, but also just the way that we think about story as a line, or we think about the arc of character development, and the way that rational thought works, and then the way that William erases things, and how you see that kind of pentimento of what was there and what could be. And that really struck me, because that is something that blurring of that boundary of inside and outside of self and the world, these kind of edges and hybridity is the place that really interests us in our work. And I think it's an important, one of the things I love that you say is that when making art, it's really more about the recognizing than the knowing. And for me, that was such a, I love that statement, because it implies that you have the courage to sort of see what emerges, and also that you're not coming with all the answers. In fact, you're coming with the questions. And for us, it's the directors that come with the questions who are the directors we like to work with, and we like to see how those questions evolve over the making. The ones who come with all the answers, just to tell you, stay away from them. Because, it's that curiosity. It's also that kind of middle of the night, hey, Joss, I don't know if I have a film, that if I don't get that 3 a.m. call from the filmmaker, at some point I know that the film isn't necessarily going to be good. And I know that you went through a lot.
That's our time difference, that the 3 a.m., that's why 6 p.m. But at 4 in the morning, when all that happens, when you think this can only be a disaster, if only I hadn't started this, then I could be happy. Which in fact is a kind of sometimes a productive panic, because everything gets thrown in the air. That's right. And sometimes it lands in a different place. Right. But at the time, it always just appears as dread. I've got all this material. People have spent so many months, so much work, so much money has been spent on these projects, and it's going to arrive as kind of ash on the floor. It can only arrive as ash on the floor, is the feeling one feels at the time. So it's vital and remarkable to have people who say, yes, I know you feel it's going to be ash on the floor, but we actually see it becoming something different to that. So keep going.
Keep going.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, the COVID, because of the lockdown in South Africa, how long was the lockdown? It was 6, 8 weeks, 10 weeks?
It was 10 weeks, I think,
initially. It's a long time in South Africa, like a total lockdown. When you started, you had one person, Chris, who was doing the camera and the sound. Yeah. And then gradually, I think you had more people come in gradually, and then more and more collaborators kept
And then
coming.
As we got everybody in, 16 of us got COVID in 1 week from the whole crew. So,
but then they all had it, and then we could keep them all together.
It was kind of like a blessed period, because at that stage you'd have thought if you'd had it, you couldn't get it again, and B, you couldn't give it to anyone. So we were mask-free, at ease, relaxed in the studio for about 8 months till we realized, in fact, there were new variants that you could get, and you could get it again. And then and then with the second one, when we had Omicron, everyone in South Africa was getting it in the same week. We said, okay, people who didn't have COVID should stay home, and only people with COVID should come into the studio for us to work together. That lasted about 2 weeks also.
Yeah, but I mean that led us to the form, and also a kind of non-interventionist. I think about it like the Jean Renoir films. It's like you have a camera that's there, that's not intervening, but at the same time is arranged carefully so that when you see the process of it, making the illusion, but you also see how it works. And I love that aspect of your work, that you are simultaneously revealing the mechanism of the trickery and at the same time showing it's not even trickery, it's really magicking things up with the compositing and such. But maybe you could talk about the mirroring and the windows and
Yes, I mean, in the beginning, as it became clear that it was going to be me in the studio, and there weren't going to be talking heads. It wasn't going to be a documentary in the sense of talking heads talking about the other friends of the artist, talking about the artist or professional colleagues. And so if there was going to be a voice, it would have to be mine, but I didn't only want a voiceover. So it became this split conversation with myself. Which became a kind of mirroring. In the end, the shocking thing was I kept on hearing my father's voice in one of the characters talking, and then sometimes my brother's voice in the other one, and I still hear the skepticism of my father's voice in some of the questions which are asked. He used to say, when I said, well, I was doing a puppet theatre production of Wozzeck, he would say, yes, I can see it's possible to do a puppet production of Wozzeck. I'm just wondering why it's necessary. And so I kind of hear that same skepticism about, and then one says, yeah, but you understand it's vital because it's not necessary. And then you go, I'm not sure that I accept that answer. And then I have to say, well, I'm not sure that I accept the question. And so it kind of plays off itself. The hard part, the grammar. So the form is found, but then the real work is learning the grammar of what you're doing, which is to say, how does one actually remember the pauses of what that person said? Because when he was filmed, and what am I saying now? What is the tempo to keep a sense of this impossible conversation? Because it's only half a conversation at each time. And then, as you say, it did require the great wizardry of the editors to put it together and to slow this voice down or to speed up that so it feels like a conversation. But there were other things that were kind of, it's how to do a drawing. So at some point, it's okay, let's make this ridiculous. Let's get a hammer and a chisel and a bench plane and say, this is how you can draw with charcoal. But the trouble was that I really made marks I really liked, using a chisel and a hammer. And so now they're part of the vocabulary of doing the drawings. So it was less predictable.
But it's, that lack of predictability, you don't just accept the image, you understand how it's made. And I think that's actually really important right now, because how reality is mediated for us is an incredibly important issue right now. And so I feel like that process of not necessarily showing all the transitions, but actually focusing on transformation and looking at things in different ways and how those things align depending on where you stand. I mean, you create the kind of impression of walking around a sculpture, even though you're actually watching it on a flat screen. But you're actually looking at how we agree that we're creating reality. And that, to me, is very profound, actually.
I mean, I think that's very much what the studio can do. That there are processes in the studio that are completely self-evident or obvious, but which show processes which are otherwise kind of invisible in the outside world. So to take collage as the simple example, where one's used to, from the beginning of the 20th century, to accept that as a form. Here are clear fragments of the world, a newspaper magazine, a piece of a rush chair, put together and sent back out as a painting. So we've had the world, it's been fragmented, rearranged, and sent back out. And we accept that and understand this is a way of making, in this case, a picture. But it's less obvious that that is the way we also construct our understanding of the world, although, of course, it's always has to be a combination of different partial and fragmentary pieces of, what we've read in the newspaper, a conversation we've had, polls that have been published, the dreams we had. Through all of these different fragments, we construct a possible coherence in the world. And I suppose you're aware in the studio that it's provisional, that it's not an absolute truth. It's a possible construction, and that can indicate a way of our complicity in making meaning outside. So I think that's one of the, there are many things in the studio, but that's one of the features of the studio.
And you're really opening your studio up, right? And this, your process, and these fragments you're talking about are woven together so lyrically, and then also divided out across 9 episodes. And so what I would love to hear from both of you is, at what point did you realize, or did you always know that you wanted this to be episodic? And then from there, how would it be shared with the world, right? These things we're talking about with your interior view, and that resonates, of course, with how all of us experienced lockdown in various ways over those many months. But you had the ability to use yourself as a strategy to kind of explore these sort of more global issues. But what that even mirrored further is the way in which now this work is going to be shown through streaming through MUBI. I was able to see the exhibition in which these were installed in Venice earlier this year, and it's a very different experience in being able to, when I was rewatching them over the last week, being able to choose how I wanted to see them, when I wanted to see them. And so can you share a little bit about when and how you made the decision to break this out into a series, and that you wanted it to be shared through this kind of platform?
I think the starting point was the new way of looking at filmed material in the streaming platforms. Mm-hmm. You know that if it's going to be for broadcast, it's very hard to persuade a broadcaster to say, here are 9 episodes about one artist stuck in his studio. I said, well, it's such a limited, small audience. Whereas with the streaming, what could be, yes, each area could be quite a small audience, but cumulatively it might be enough to justify doing it. So there were always, it was a series, I thought, here's something that's possible now that would have been impossible mm-hmm. in the pre-streaming mm-hmm. era. So that was always the idea. Okay. It was never going to be a 4-hour-long feature film. Mm-hmm. It's also the fact that it's episodic in the sense of different subjects tackled in each one. Mm-hmm. It would have been lovely to have a cliffhanger at the end of each one, and to have had in the first episode, I said, wouldn't it be nice if it's a detective story and there's a body on the ground and a detective comes in with a good cigar and a fine Central European moustache. And then I thought, okay, that's a task for me. Let's make the whole thing, find the detective story that goes. And I failed at that. So it was always hoped. And then one of the things that Joss and Rachel and other people said, yes, that's fine, but in fact it still has to find its shape that will work within a streaming system. So the first cut, I think they were like 50 minutes long, each episode. The first time there was the erasure of a drawing, it took 4 minutes to erase a drawing, and I thought, that's great, that's the first 4 minutes of film done. And then we were blessed by having Walter Murch, one of the great editors of the world, as a consulting editor. Initially, when I'd phoned him and said he'd love to be the editor, I said, well, could he edit it? But he said he's writing a book and was going to take him another 4 months to finish the book. And I said, well, then by then we'll have finished the series. Anyway, 4 years later, we finished the series, and I had a message from Walter saying he's just on the last chapter of his book now. But so the editing, there were 3 editors in my studio who work on projects there. And every week there'd be a phone call with Walter. He was at lockdown in London. We'd send him material and he'd give advice that ranged from talking about the nature of filmmaking in general to specific scenes that weren't working, to him saying, I tried this and I took 4 frames off the end here and 3 there, and the sound I've prelapsed by another 1.5 seconds, and listen to it, tell me, to extreme. And that was remarkable, at the age of nearly 70, having someone who feels like a mentor, showing you what you're doing. So for all of us, for me and the editors and everyone, it's an enormous learning and fantastic way of working. So between the editors and Walter and then the keen eye of the producers, it found its shape. And then to MUBI to finally say, yes, okay, we will put it on a streaming platform. Because it also wasn't obvious when we'd nearly finished the film that it was going to find such a home.
Well, this was going to be my question to Joslyn, is sort of, right, so you have this, this idea of an episodic series. We are working through, shall it be 50 minutes? Now it's roughly 30 minutes each. How does this model of circulation come to be? Was it a trial and error? Did you know immediately that MUBI would be kind of the dream scenario?
No, it's a good question. I mean, most people don't produce series independently. Films, yes. Series, no, because they are hard to sell unless they're commissioned. And also there's so few buyers in the marketplace now for series. And actually over the course of the 4 years, also because of COVID, a lot of people closed down and or cut heads. And it's really tough now in the marketplace to find a home for series. And as you said, with broadcasters, the lead time for broadcasters has to be so long, even the great European broadcasters like Arte and ZDF and these others, to actually find the time for 9 episodes would take a couple of years to actually do that. So it was and length is a question. Sometimes you have to test length with viewers to actually understand if you're, especially with something like this, with a series, you're not totally sure what the optimum length is for people. Also thinking about how people are watching. Are they watching in their homes? Are they watching with other people? This kind of experience of watching in the home lends itself to also, watching a lot of things in a row. Or the nice thing about this is you can watch them all in a row as curated, or you can watch them separately and not have to have seen the proceeding to follow. So you can also watch it on a small screen or even smaller screen as you're traveling. So I think we thought streaming was the kind of perfect way to go about this. But it was a great combination, actually. I think this was a very unique sale. Organized with Hauser Wirth, Williams Gallery, to sell this as editions, and then inviting MUBI in to both acquire an edition and also acquire the world streaming rights, which meant that anyone else who acquires an edition can use that edition in their own institution. But only MUBI has the world streaming rights, and I don't think that's ever been done before. And so it's great because you have the advantage of 2 really sophisticated and interesting institutions with a lot of minds at play, incredible marketing and strategic team, as well as people who understand not only reaching an audience, but people who also understand cultivating an audience, creating an audience, people who want to actually push the envelope, who don't want to just say, let's accommodate the marketplace, but actually want to make the films and series and projects that they want to see, that we all want to see in the marketplace. I mean, it's not like the current audience taste came out of nowhere. It's the product of people deliberately dumbing things down for the last 20 years or longer. The audience that we have now is conditioned in a very particular way for very particular reasons, which is a much longer conversation. I think if you're all sitting here, you all know that.
I mean, there was the case of right at the beginning of the first episode, within 40 seconds, the word Torschlusspanik comes in.
And I was like,
and at one point we say Torschluss, which is the panic of the closing door of one possibility closing out other possibilities, talking about what one does or doesn't draw. And there was this big argument, does the whole audience switch off after the word Torschlusspanik? And I said, no, we're going to battle ahead. We're going to push ahead and hope that they can survive Torschlusspanik and continue. And they said, right, but if we let Torschlusspanik come out of the megaphone, the sousaphone, so we understand it's an alien voice, so we don't have to take it seriously, then maybe people will stay with us through Torschlusspanik. And as Walter said, we had some very beautiful but quite difficult modernist music over some Webern, and he said, that's fine. He said, you've given the audience dry bread. At a certain point, you need to give them cake, or they're going to leave. So then there was something much more recent, more easy. So there was a kind of a sense of, which I've never had when I'm making drawings. There's never really that sense of what is it going to say to someone else? Because it can work just with the people in your circle, or maybe a few people, people that come to the gallery, but suddenly having to do some accommodation. So, but I'm pleased that Torschlusspanik stayed in.
Well, I think this idea of, placing, this engagement, right? You're now in this engagement with an audience that maybe you don't know. And I think that that's really exciting. And it's also placing agency back into quite literally the hands of an audience, which is somewhat counter to what the long history is with artists engaging in a sort of mass medium, like, television and experiments that went on in the 70s and the 80s, and is very interventionist, and viewers just were watching the news, and an image of a fireplace flashed on for 3 minutes and then went away, and did the same thing for multiple nights. And so these things happened and they weren't explained. And so I think that, what both of you are saying, Joslyn, you're saying, there's this audience that's out there, and then there's this flexibility of the medium, but there's also you kind of thinking about that too. And so I think it's this lovely new mode of kind of collaboration, right? That I think is kind of forging in a new direction, which is something that's, I think, worthy of noting here in this, incredible. I mean, you were saying yesterday, you're I think this might be a new model. This might be this hasn't been done before, which is, I think, something to celebrate in addition to the flexibility of the work itself.
I mean, we've spanned such a, it's really interesting to think about this because, to go back to charcoal, I learned the other day as I was reading something, I learned that the Inca believed that writing contributes to forgetting, and that actually weaving and the tying of knots is what preserves culture and memory. And I thought that was really interesting because in this kind of process of thinking about algorithms and AI and what all this means, when you use this kind of the way that you open up the space for human freedom, and this also the working with the hands, and Walter talks about this also with the editing, that sometimes there are the concepts and there are the ideas, and then there's just letting the hands go to work and intuiting what to do, and what that means in terms of determinism, and I think at one point, and I forget who said this, but somebody said along the way that making destiny more vulnerable, was part of William's work. And I thought that was so beautiful and so true. And actually, that is a kind of resistance to algorithms. And technology, it's based on the values of the society, but that only works if citizens have agency. And if we get to decide what our values are and how those technologies are deployed, we're in this completely accelerated problem of not being able to keep up and not being able to make these decisions and having other people make decisions that we probably wholly dislike. And so I come back to you and ask this question because, to start with the charcoal or the weaving with the knots as a form of, resistance to this, at the same time also acknowledging that technologies can be extremely beneficial too.
I always write my notes with the fountain pen, or any lectures with the fountain pen. It's mainly because I'm such an inaccurate typer that the keyboard just doesn't work for me as a way of thinking. I'm always just rereading and pressing collect and backspace and correcting. Whereas
Well, you
there's
had that
sometimes
old typewriter too.
yeah, which is sometimes there's in writing with the fountain pen, often it's illegible what's been written. So you then have a second invention of what could it mean. Did I write signs of repentance or sighs of repentance? and allowing that ambiguity. So it's kind of also trying to structure a possibility for stupidity. Human stupidity as opposed to artificial intelligence. Not just in the sense of celebrating not making sense, but finding strategies to find things that we would recognize rather than know. And I'm sure there'll soon be an algorithm for virtual stupidity as part of the, you can turn it up, turn the volume up or down. And I'm certainly, in all digital editing systems, there's different kinds of AI embedded that can trace an outline of a shape, that can judge differences between pixels, can intuit what a mid-space should be between two frames to do a motion blur, to all those sort of things which are part of the toolbox of all editing systems. So it's not like we're Luddites not wanting to use that. But it's very much after the analog making. We had 3 months, not a happy 3 months, of working with a virtual reality company that said we would scan the studio, we'd scan everything in it, we'd be able to have we could have a performer in Berlin and people could be watching in Taipei, and you'd see the studio and the thing in it. And foolishly, I went ahead for about 3 months of us trying this. And then to our big relief, the whole thing fell apart. But not to say it couldn't be done, but not with the kind of technology and without spending the money that gaming people spend on that quality of... So it always just looked like a really unthought out bad video game.
Right.
With no one to shoot and no gold nuggets to pick up along the way.
Well, I think that there's this, time is so important to your practice. It's, when I think about your films, it's recording, you're drawing over time. And so to sort of round out the conversation about this series is that we are really tracking time. And then it's something that I wanted to understand if you were really aware of it in the actual moment, or was it just sort of, let's move through this, right? Each episode, as you said, has more or less a theme or a focus. But is that the way in which you shot everything? Like, oh, this is going to be the episode 1, and we're addressing this, or is more this is where kind of all the hard editing work took place?
No, I think there was for the most part, we knew the material we were filming was destined for that episode. At a certain point, we smashed 2 episodes together. It came from 12 down to 9, so there was some, and then we rearranged the order of them. But certainly, by and large, I mean, we knew at a certain point, we like the nighttime scenes after the first night sequence in the studio. So we'd say, let's put I want to do another night. So we've seen the rats once. Let's bring the rats back out of the cupboard and put them around on the table. So there was some of that. But when you talk about time, there is obviously that transformation of time in the studio. I mean, there's a transformation. There's a sense you have a broad theme, and then when you come into the studio, it kind of gets lost in the immediacy of making it and realizing, in the hope that when it leaves the studio at the end as a film or sequences, that first thought will somehow still be there or transformed, but in it. But in the actual studio, it gets... So if you might deal with a subject that is painful, but inside the studio, it really doesn't matter if it's a still life you're drawing or something much more personal or something else. In the activity, it's a very similar. Is it too dark? Is it too slow? Is it moving ahead? Have we got the light in the right place? How do we need to move so it gets dissolved. The world gets dissolved into these series of kind of formal or technical questions, in the hope that when they're put together and they go out, they're not just that series of technical questions, but come back to the larger question at the beginning. But there's a big space to understand the stupidity in the middle.
That's important.
I mean, somebody did say, a poet said that it's vital that the poet is always cleverer, the poem is always cleverer than the poet. That if the poet knows everything the poem is going to do, they shouldn't be writing it. So it's a similar feeling in the hope that more will come out in the studio than one anticipates.
We're at time. That seems like a wonderful place to close. Yeah, we're good. Anything else?
Thank you.